All right then. Patrick Evans. Watch your nose. Okay.
And would you like me to look at the camera or look at you?
I'll be right behind the camera.
Okay.
Yeah, right there. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. Today we have the honor of talking to Patrick Evans. And Patrick, do I have your permission to take this interview?
Yes.
Okay. And Patrick, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia. My father was a professor at the University of Virginia, and so we lived there my entire childhood. And then I ended up going to the University of Virginia as well. So I was in Charlottesville until I graduated in May of 1989. And actually, after I graduated, I started working for the NBC affiliate. I was already doing that on a part-time basis as far back as high school. I started working in television when I was 17. So I went to a full-time position literally the day after I graduated. I graduated on a Sunday in May, and on Monday morning I started as the morning weather person at WVIR television. So I remained in Charlottesville until 1990 before I took a job in Roanoke, Virginia. So I was there from my earliest days.
And you have a degree in environmental studies.
Environmental science.
Oh, environmental science.
And,
Okay.
and also in communication with a minor in political science.
Mm-hmm. Now, what drew you to environmental science?
I was always interested in weather, and not just the mechanics of day-to-day weather, but I was really interested in atmospheric sciences kind of on a bigger scale. When I was a little kid, I just, always was fascinated by what made lightning and what made seasons. And I'm a very big space buff, so atmospheric sciences as related to our space program and how we studied the atmosphere. I was, fascinated by rocketry and satellites, and so it all kind of worked together. And working in a TV station as a teenager, I sort of fell in love with the environment of a television newsroom, and in looking at what kind of jobs would be available, I watched a lot of weather. I saw newscasters. I like doing news. I enjoy occasionally anchoring or reporting, but I much preferred. There's a lot of freedom in doing weather, and so I thought that kind of fit my interests, but it also fit some of my skill set. So that's why when I got to the University of Virginia, I did environmental sciences as a study.
Now, you consider yourself to be a meteorologist, is that as opposed to a weatherman? Is that true?
Yes, and that's really, there are lots of different definitions, but most people who are on television who refer to themselves as meteorologists and kind of claim that title have a 4-year degree in atmospheric sciences of some kind, meteorology, climatology, environmental sciences as I studied. Most meteorologists probably have a little more of the advanced math than I do, because my curriculum, I worked in the Department of Climatology for the state climatologists in Virginia, so I did a bit more climatology than a lot of meteorology students. But I found, especially with climate science being so, all-encompassing these days, I'm really happy that I have a background in climatology, because it allows me to keep ahead of the science and be able to talk about that.
When you first came to California, you were in Orange County, is that true?
Correct, yes. I moved to the beach. I took a job with a little company called the Orange County News Channel. It was in the basement of the Orange County Register newspaper, and it was owned by Adelphia Communications. And so for 2 years I worked there and was the chief meteorologist, and it was a blast. I lived in Laguna Beach, and it was a lot of fun working at a beach and doing, coastal California is so different than being here in the desert. And it was very different from the environment that I grew up in. I was a long way. I was about 3 hours from the beach and the ocean growing up. I was in the mountains. And so it was really nice. It was a challenge meteorologically, because California has its whole different weather ecosystem. The marine layer is unique to the West Coast. So there was a lot that I had a nice learning curve, which made it very interesting. Plus, Orange County is I was living in Roanoke, Virginia, which is a beautiful mountain town in the western part of the state. I'd been there for a decade, so Orange County was a complete, I wouldn't say culture shock. I enjoyed the change, but it was a completely different culture. So,
And not only was it Orange County, but it was California too, as well.
yes.
And how did you make your way here to the desert? Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned, the Orange County News Channel was owned by Adelphia Communications, and in late 2001, that company had some significant problems, and it was owned by the Regas family. It was a father and two sons, I believe. And about the same time that Enron was self-destructing, the Adelphia Communications Company did the same thing. They'd been embezzling about $1 billion from their own business. So all of the principals ended up going to jail, and the company had to kind of sell off assets. And we were one of the first, the Orange County News Channel, that they sold off, and they dismantled the news division. So we were, basically, I was told, thanks, but we're not doing news anymore. I was lucky in that I had just signed about 2 months earlier a one-year contract, so they still had to pay me. But it left me looking for a job. And in late 2002, the Houstons were about to launch this TV station. So I started looking, and they were hiring. And so I got to come out to the Coachella Valley. I moved here in August of 2002. And we went on the air on Labor Day 2002. And I was one of the original 78 employees that Jackie Lee and Jim Houston hired to staff that TV station. And I was with the station, have been with the station since its inception. In about 2012, Mrs. Houston passed away, and our company was purchased by our chief competitor, the owners of KESQ, the ABC affiliate. And so I was one of the lucky ones that they invited to stay with the company. So I've been on the air here in the Coachella Valley for 21 years, almost 22.
When you first came here, did you have Eye on the Desert from the beginning, or?
No, Eric Sandoval was the anchor of Eye on the Desert, and at that time it was a half-an-hour program, Monday through Friday. We had an anchor change, as news stations often do, big shakeups in staff. They're trying to gain a footing. So Eric then became the main news anchor and continued to do Eye on the Desert for a little while. And then it's very tough to do that because as the main anchor, he had a lot of other duties. So they eventually asked me to step in. I hosted it for several years, and then my duties changed, and so I took a hiatus. We've had some, Gino Lamont at one point worked for our station before he went back to KMIR and then on to the Firebirds. We had Scott Hennessy, who was our sports anchor. He hosted Eye on the Desert for a couple of years as well. But over the 21 years, I've been the longest host. And out of those 21 years, I have hosted it for 17 or 18 of those 21 years.
Now, how would you define Eye on the Desert?
We bill it as an arts and entertainment program, but it was, I expand that to say it's arts, entertainment, and philanthropy, because so much of the art and entertainment that happens in the Coachella Valley happens around the philanthropic community. And it was an outlet. One of the reasons that Jackie Lee Houston really wanted to own and run a television station in the Coachella Valley, she was involved in so much philanthropy, and it was hard to get television coverage because really focused on hard news, and so it's difficult sometimes to get softer stories, kind of those feel-good stories. So she was really responsible for creating Eye on the Desert as an outlet for her to promote the charitable things that she was interested in. And she was a great supporter. It was really a remarkable introduction to the Valley, because when I first started at the television station, Jackie Lee Houston would sponsor virtually, and this is back in the day when all the big charities, they all had black tie galas. And, I was a kid working in television in a small market. We weren't making a lot of money, but Jackie Lee Houston would buy 2 or 3 tables at all of these black tie galas. And suddenly I found myself being invited to all these because Jackie would just invite us to sit at one of her tables. She wanted to show off her television station and the people she employed. So I got this tremendous kind of crash course on philanthropy in the Coachella Valley, and it was fantastic. And so I try to keep Eye on the Desert's focus about that and tell those really good stories. It's remarkable the number of charities and 501c3s we have here, and we have the Coachella Valley Spotlight, which is the HN and Francis C. Berger Foundation partnered with KESQ, and every month the HN and Francis C. Berger Foundation writes a $25,000 check, and we put the organizations on television. And a lot of them could never afford a television spot, and we have them on Eye in the Desert. We give them 3 minutes of television time several times a month. It would be outrageously costly, but we give it to them for free. So we give them both exposure and they get the money from the Berger Foundation.
How does Eye on the Desert connect with being a meteorologist, being a weatherman? Yeah.
Throughout, really, if you look at how television is structured, weather people have always been those who are a little more flexible. One of the things that we do that my colleagues in the newsroom don't, I work without a script. Everything I do on the chroma key wall is all ad lib. And we're also the people who are asked to, obviously I'm not a geologist, I'm an environmental scientist, but we talk about the earthquakes, so we have to do that. We also, because you're never going to send me out to do a story on, who embezzled $1 million from what. Our anchor people have to do that. So it's harder for them to do stories, kind of more lighthearted stories, because it at some point they may have to cover the very people they're interviewing. We certainly hope not, but weather people are not as constrained by that. And so they are relied upon to do more of the feature work in a newsroom. And I like it because it gives me more variety and it gives me, I love the weather. And people always say, there's no weather in Palm Springs, it's hot and sunny, but that's not true. We have a really fascinating microclimate here and in the mountains. I'm never not busy at work with the weather, but also with Eye on the Desert, I like to be involved in the community I live in. I just kind of grew up, my dad was a college professor, but he was also, my parents were both very involved in different charitable organizations. My dad was a county supervisor, and he really said, it's really important when a community gives you success that you give something back to the community. And I count myself very lucky. I've been here for 20 plus years. I've gotten to know the philanthropic community. And so I just like being involved in that way. And I think it's really important because we use the public airwaves to do what we do. And I think some people like to just come and do that and sell commercials and not really get too deeply involved. I think it's really important. We live here, should be involved to the extent that we can.
People know that well about you. Yes.
Well, I've made it a really a focus of my career to when a charity or an organization calls me up and says, we're doing an event, can you help out with our event? Of course, we can get you on the air. And they say, well, can you be the MC or the auctioneer? Or I say yes, as often as I can.
How do you describe the Coachella Valley?
Coachella Valley is the most miraculous place anybody could live. I grew up on the East Coast. And I grew up, my parents were a little older, we skewed older. I was very familiar with all the old school greats like Bob Hope, and of course I'm a Sinatra fan, and you can't mention those names without weaving them into the lore that is the Coachella Valley in Palm Springs. And so it was always kind of a mystical place. I heard about it my whole life. First time I ever came to Palm Springs, it was 1998, and it was the fall of 1998. Frank Sinatra had passed away that spring, and I was visiting friends in Orange County. I hadn't yet gone to work there, but I said, no, we're going to go to Palm Springs for the weekend, and we're going to go see Frank's grave, and we're going to drive around, and we're going to see as many Frank Sinatra landmarks as we can. And that was my introduction to Palm Springs in October of 1998. And I didn't realize that just 4 years later I'd be working here. But I ended up moving here after Orange County, and Orange County I loved living there. The fact that the TV station I was working for goes belly up, it was a big sea change in my life, and it was very unsettling. I'd barely gotten my roots set in California. I didn't want to go back to the East Coast. So coming to the desert was a very healing thing. I think a lot of people come here to find themselves or reinvent themselves or heal from trauma of one kind or another. And I found that to be exactly what I needed. I thought maybe I'd come here for a couple of years and then move on to a different market. But I fell in love with the desert. And again, part of that was working for the Houstons. I got exposed to so much of this incredible, lifestyle that is here that normally I wouldn't have been, just as a kid working for the TV station, that wouldn't have happened. But the Houstons sort of took me under their wing and made sure that I got to know what a wonderful place this is.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. You are married to. Please tell us about your wife and your children.
My wife, Andrea Gudritis. She is an American Lithuanian. Her parents were both born in Lithuania and were trapped between the advancing Soviets and the Germans. So they were forced to leave their home. Andrea's grandmother was sent to Siberia. Her grandfather was arrested, but later was released, very luckily, and managed to escape. But he was a police chief, and so they were arresting a lot of those people and removing them. But my wife was born in Los Angeles, but also spent a great deal of time from her latter part of college until she went to law school, about 10 years off and on, living in Lithuania, working for the U.S. Embassy. She was there when Lithuania was the first republic under the Soviet flag to declare its independence. And it was the first test of Gorbachev and would he roll the tanks and fire the guns, or would he allow this to happen? And he did roll tanks, and she was there when the tanks rolled to the Lithuanian parliament, and they were held up there for several days. Finally, Gorbachev relented and allowed them to become an independent republic. They were the first. As an American who spoke Lithuanian and understood the culture, I think she was very vital to the process of that country going through its independence. And she she maintains a residence in Lithuania. She's there now. We were there earlier. But she's an attorney in Los Angeles. She does her entire practice is family law, so it's I think it's a really tough job. The stories she tells are just like it's amazing. Because you meet these two people and they're at the worst point in their life in their marriage, and they're both mad, and she's the one that has to unravel all that, and so I'm always impressed with what she does. But we met. She was on a weekend here in Palm Springs with a friend, and we met, and I took her to Melvin's and took her dancing at Melvin's, and the rest is history.
What's it like for you to go to Lithuania? What's that like?
I've been several times now since we've been married. The first trip we ever took was, we were talking about getting married, but it was her parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And so the whole family went, and most of them went for an extended stay. I was there for about 2.5 weeks. It was remarkable. I lived in Italy as an exchange student when I was younger. I loved Europe. And Vilnius, the old part of the city, it's like any other beautiful European city. Old town, absolutely gorgeous. And you walk around, it really, it sometimes gets, the Baltics kind of get categorized as Eastern Europe, but they're really not. They're much more Northern Europe. They have more in common with Finland and Norway than they do with Prague. And it's a really interesting culture. It is still, working on developing after the Soviet occupation. I mean, it's been an independent country, free country now for 30 years, but for 50 years, between World War II and 1990, it was a Soviet country, and the Soviet Union tried to make everybody speak Russian, not Lithuanian. They tried to stamp out Lithuanian culture. So there's still a sense that this is a society that is recovering from that trauma. But it is a member of NATO. It is a member of the EU. The thing that I noticed about our most recent trip is there's a lot of money in Vilnius. It's a young, vibrant town, and I think there's a lot of commerce going on. So it seems to be like really gaining momentum.
How has the desert changed since you've been here?
Oh my goodness. It's grown so much. And we've had, huge growth spurts. There was that giant growth spurt that was underway when I got here in 2002. They continued until about 2007, where there was nonstop building. And then in 2007 and 8, everything, the world came to a screeching halt, and the desert did as well. Then the pandemic hit, and we had been recovering nicely. All of a sudden, people didn't want to live in LA or San Diego or Sacramento or San Francisco, and they were coming here because they discovered houses are a little cheaper. We can sell our small, expensive home in LA and buy a big house in Palm Springs and work remotely. So I've seen those two really giant growth spurts. I remember when I first moved here, Portola stopped. It just it stopped right there. I think at Frank Sinatra, didn't go any farther than that. So the growth has been tremendous, but I think the resurgence of downtown Palm Springs is something that, when I got here, the old mall was still there and abandoned, and it was an eyesore, and it was still the village. But now it retains that, like, all of a sudden Modernism Week came along and people realized what a gem of modern architecture and culture we are. And so now, instead of just kind of looking fondly at the modernism, we revel in it, and we bring 100,000 people in from all across the globe to revel in it with us. So I've seen some really tremendous growth, and it brings in young people. When I moved to the Coachella Valley, I was in my very early 30s, and in 2002, and universally, I was the youngest person to walk in a room when I went to an event. That's just not the case anymore. Of course, I've gotten older, but the valley's gotten younger. We had, and now, like I mentioned, I love Melvin's. I knew Mel Haber. Spent a lot of time there, and now when I go to Melvin's, it's really funny because it's a lot of kids from LA and San Diego coming up to get that Palm Springs Frank Sinatra experience. And so it's nice to see that the next generation still appreciates that about Palm Springs. So I've seen a lot of changes, but I think more positive than negative. Obviously there've been, not everything is a positive change, but I think we have in large part really good governance here, and we preserve the best parts of the valley. I've seen the Oswalt Land Trust do some great work in preserving, Chino Canyon, and now we have the Land Trust in Palm Springs, the Little Mesquite Golf Course. So the environment is so important to people here. We want to preserve that desert environment. So, and I know that the Cotino Disney development at Rancho Mirage is somewhat controversial, but I think it's going to be a tremendous addition.
You are a admirer of the music of Frank Sinatra, and you might sing as well. Is that true?
Every Italian man of a certain age after 2 drinks thinks he's Frank Sinatra, and certainly wants to be. And I love piano bars, so it goes back to Melvin's. But when I first moved to California, in Orange County, there was this fantastic place on the beach called Villanova. And Villanova started in Hollywood, and it was a haunt of Frank Sinatra's. They moved it to Orange County, moved it to Newport Beach, and it was for 30 years a staple. Great Italian restaurant, but it was a piano bar. And a very good friend, I got to be good friends with him. My buddy Richie would play the piano every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I would go in, and one day I went up to Richie and I said, "Do you know the song A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square?" And he said, "Oh yeah, that's a great song. Gosh, no one ever asked for that, but it's such a great song." And then he said something odd to me. He said, do you know all the words?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it's one of my favorite songs." He said, "Okay, great. Well, I'll play it in a little bit." So a few minutes later, he says, "Now my new friend Patrick is going to come up and sing A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square." I'm like, no, I just want to hear it." He goes, no, come up and sing. Well, I just, I'd had a couple of drinks, I'll go up and sing. And so I'm just kind of, I like a piano bar. I like to get up and croon a few. I get to know musicians through Eye on the Desert, and supporting local music, live local music is important to me. And so my friend Michael Healy over at Melvin's will get me up to sing with him. So it's always a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Who else do you admire Dean or,
I love Dean Martin, and I've gotten to be friends with his daughter, Dina Martin. She is out here on occasion. They have a home in Branson because they do a lot of performing there. I got to know Barbara Sinatra very well prior to her passing. In fact, Barbara helped me propose to Andrea. But I love the Rat Pack. I love music in virtually every iteration. But I particularly love the Great American Songbook. So the Tony Bennett's, the Frank Sinatra's, the Jerry Vales. Jerry and Rita Vale were living here in the desert when I moved here, and they sort of adopted me. I spent virtually every Christmas Eve at the Vales house. And when Jerry his health started to decline, we all still wanted to get together. Rita, instead of hosting, she's an incredible cook. And she makes the most amazing meatballs and spaghetti. So that was always part of the Christmas Eve menu. So we moved the party to the house of Ken Venturi, the great golfer and CBS golf analyst for many years. So, but it was amazing because we'd go over I was this kid from Virginia. I grew up listening to Jerry Vale and Frank Sinatra and Jack Jones. And then on this Christmas Eve, I'm sitting in Jerry Vale's house, having dinner with all these people. Jack Jones was there. Jerry, of course, was there. Andy Williams was there. Frankie Randall, who was a great friend of Sinatra's and the last piano player for Frank, he was there playing piano. And we were sitting around Jerry's piano singing Christmas songs.
Wow.
And I mean, I was just pinching myself. I couldn't believe it. It was like watching a 1970s Christmas special, but being a part of it. And like, I don't know how I ended up here. Buddy Greco was there, and I love Buddy Greco. I got to know him. He had a club in Cathedral City for a while, he and his wife, Leslie. I did an interview with Buddy.
You did?
I had him on Eye on the Desert several times, but we did when he was really opening the club, we went to the club and he and I just sat behind.
What club are you talking about?
It was called Greco's.
Oh.
And the building doesn't even exist anymore, but the city wanted to do something there, and so they gave him a great lease deal to start a supper club. And it was fantastic. They hired a great chef. It was a lot of fun. You go see, it was dinner and a show. It was kind of old school, a little more Vegas than perhaps Palm Springs. And Buddy was 80. And we were sitting behind the piano doing this interview. And I said, "Buddy, I have to ask you. I mean, you're an amazing musician. You've been doing this forever. And I'm glad you're still doing it. But why are you, you're doing a dinner show 6 nights a week."
Right.
And Buddy, he's kind of playing the piano a little bit. And he says, "I want you to look over there. You see that beautiful woman I'm married to?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "There were 4 more before her, and they all expect a check." I was like, "Okay, I get it."
These are great stories.
He was hilarious. Buddy Greco was absolutely hilarious. But that was, I admire all of those people, and it's amazing to me that, I kind of caught the tail end. I missed being here overlapping with Frank. But I've gotten to know some people who are close friends and used to go to Monday Night Football at Frank's house, and I love hearing those stories. You know.
Speaking of food, what about Fulvio's?
Fulvio's is an Italian sausage company that I started back in about 2014. My father was named Fulvio Antonio Iacetta. We lost him in 15. Yeah. Well, late 14 actually. And but I had started the company. He knew I was doing it. He and I always used to talk about the family recipes because my grandfather came over from a little town in Italy called Cervonara outside of Naples, and he was a very young man when he came through Ellis Island. And he came with a broader family, bringing recipes that dated back hundreds of years. We've been making this Italian sausage in our family for hundreds of years. It was a tradition. My father would wake me up on a Saturday morning, and it was hilarious. He'd say, "The pork's on sale. We got to go get it. We're going to make 80 pounds of Italian sausage." And I'm like, okay. And so we go do that. And so then I continued that tradition. I made Italian sausage and homemade meatballs, and tried to learn all of my mother and father's and grandmother's recipes before I left home. And so when I arrived here in the desert, I like cooking and I would like culinary events. And one day, my ex-wife, my first wife, she worked at the Desert Sun, and she called me and she said, "We're doing an auction for the United Way. Would you consider donating like a dinner for 10, and like an Italian dinner for 10? And I said, "Sure, that'd be fine." I consider myself a pretty good cook. I don't consider myself a chef. But she called me back about half an hour later. She said, "Well, that went for like $800, $1,200. Would you do another one?" I'm like, "Sure." Yeah, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So I started auctioning off these dinners where I do a 5-course Italian dinner. I bring it to your home. And one of the things that I always do as our main dish is the pasta of your choice with my homemade Italian meatballs and the homemade sausage. We were at this dinner party, and this gentleman came up to me afterwards and said, "Where did you buy that Italian sausage? Because I grew up in New York. I've been here for 30 years. I can't find authentic Italian sausage like this. And just so tell me where you got it." And I said, "I didn't get it. I made it." He's like, "No, nobody makes it." And I said, "No, I buy the pork. I grind it myself. I season it myself. I stuff it myself." He said, "No way." He said, "You have to market this." And I was like, I'm a weatherman. I have no idea how to do that. So he hooked me up with a test kitchen. We made some sample product. We figured out, because I make Italian sausage at home 10 pounds at a time. He had to figure out, how do you make 500 pounds at a time?
Wow.
Or 1,000 pounds at a time? So we had to really break it down to,
Scale it.
If it's 1 pound of meat, how many grams of salt, fennel, I'm not going to give away all my secret ingredients, but you had to figure out literally a scalable recipe. And so it took us, and I found a company in Orange County that would make me test batches at 100 pounds. Most companies wanted to do 1,000 pounds, but if it's not right, what do you do with 1,000 pounds of the wrong recipe? So I was very lucky. And so we tweaked the recipe. We made about 3 or 4 test batches, and I knocked on doors all around the valley to my restaurant friends and said, "Hey, I just want you to try this. Here's a sample. This is an Italian sausage product I'm working on." And so then finally I got a number of restaurants. Just driving around knocking on doors. I got about 30 restaurants to serve it. And about that time, Crown Meats picked us up. They're the distributor for the product. So it's a very small boutique company. I don't sell enough to do anything more than keep the family recipe alive, but I want to expand it, and I have plans for growing that. But it's one of those things that it requires a lot of time, and I don't always have enough time to devote to it. But I love doing it. I love going to a restaurant and seeing my father's name on the menu.
How does that work? Do you call it? Fulvio.
Fulvio's.
Okay, Fulvio's.
Fulvio's Italian. We do Fulvio's Foods Italian sausage. So in restaurants usually the restaurant is going to carry it, often puts the brand name there, because people know the brand because they know me, and it's a nice symbiotic relationship. But it's great to, like I said, we lost my father many years ago, but it's great to see his legacy live on.
You had a special relationship with your father.
Oh yeah. My dad was born in 1928, and so he was in his very early 40s when I came along. So he was like growing up with a lot of you hear the stories about old Italian guys, and they're very set in their ways, and they're very old school, and that was my dad to a T. He certainly was that. But he was a brilliant man. He had a PhD in mechanical engineering and taught it for 40 years. But the thing that impressed me about my father, he was probably the brightest man, one of the brightest men I've ever met. But he was absolutely the most ethical human being I've ever met. I've never met anyone, and I strive to live up, but I fail. But he was just a pillar of ethics, and it's just that old school upbringing, and you just don't see. A lot of people cut corners, and Pop was never one of those guys.
Palm Springs Walk of the Stars.
Yes.
Now, when did that happen?
That happened, how many years ago? 2013? April of 2013. So what happened was, I did a little work with the Dolly Sinatra Lodge of the Sons and Daughters of Italy.
Is that still there?
Yes, it's still there. A guy named Joe Laporta is the president now, and he's done a great job. He's been the president for several years. And at the time I was working, my schedule didn't even allow me to go, but they do, throughout the season, they do a Wednesday night pasta dinner. And it usually is accompanied by some fun entertainment. And so I put that on Eye of the Desert. And, not every week, but, every once in a while I'd say, and don't forget on Wednesdays, go to the Dolly Sinatra Lodge, get a great pasta dinner. At that time it was like 10 or 12 bucks a plate. It's gone up, as everything has. But one day Joe Laporta called me up. And he said, I want to take you to lunch. I said, okay. He said, I know you've been to the lodge once or twice, but you talk about it a lot. And it's really, we really appreciate it. It's really helped us. And he said, I had this committee, and every year we do our kind of Lodge Man of the Year. And he said, I'm the head of the committee, and I name you the Lodge Man of the Year. I'm like, I was, so touched and so honored, because it wasn't like I was heavily involved. I helped where I could. And that involves a really nice, they throw a banquet for you. And my father was still alive at the time, and so it was great fun to tell him.
Did he come?
He did not come. He was not traveling by that point.
Yeah.
But he just thought it was terrific that, I was going to be the Italian-American Man of the Year at the Dolly Sinatra Lodge. And of course, being a Frank Sinatra fan, to be honored by the Sinatra Lodge was something that was huge to me. But they surprised me at that banquet. They give you this really beautiful plaque with a gavel and it's just very nice presentation. But Joe handed me that, and he said, and also as part of this, the Lodge has nominated you for a star on the Palm Springs Walk of Stars. And I was flabbergasted. I mean, that I feel is such an honor, and it's a lifetime achievement. I thought, well, first of all, I wasn't even 50 yet. And I'd been in town for a decade, a little longer than that. And obviously I'd worked with a lot of different charities. And the reason they did it wasn't really for my television work. It was for the work that I'd done with philanthropic organizations. And Joe knew that. And so then they nominated me and the committee approved me. And a whole group of friends got together and did the spaghetti dinner fundraiser and raised the money for the star. And so I was the 366th recipient. And I'm very proud of that. I've received an Emmy in my career. I was for our morning broadcast.
Okay.
I've been inducted into the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Silver Circle, and that is once you have 25 plus years of service on television, you're eligible, but you have to be nominated and vetted. And so just a couple of months ago, I was inducted into that. And I have a star on the Palm Springs Walk of Stars. Those are the three biggest honors. I will always cherish all three of those, and they're equal. in my mind. But knowing it, and I said this at my star dedication, I said, 100 years from now, someone will be walking down this street and they'll see this star and they'll go, who the hell is Patrick Evans? I said, someone will do that next week too, but no, it's just, it's an honor that will last longer than I will, so it's very important to me.
Is there a place here in the desert, natural place that you like in particular?
Oh, there are several natural places. I love the Painted Canyon, Ladder Canyon hike. It's down by the Salton Sea in Mecca. We've done that several times. It's first of all, it's an incredible drive just to get there. Mm-hmm. But the canyon, it's a slot canyon, so you're mainly in the canyon on the hike. So you're in the shade and you do these ladders. I love that. I love the Indian canyons. Mm-hmm. Up in South Palm Springs. I think the tribe has done such a beautiful job of making that such a great oasis to go and enjoy. And they do dinner in the canyons there, which was always a fundraiser for the Agua Caliente Cultural Center. I've emceed that a couple of times as well. But you walk into that canyon at night and the way they've lighted up the little plateau, it's incredible to me. I think that's a very special place, and I love any of those hikes are all amazing. My wife really loves to hike, and I told her that I love to hike when we were dating, but I do. I say, and my other really, I think it's tremendously special. The Thousand Palms Preserve. Mm-hmm. As you go down Ramon Road, well past Thousand Palms, and you stand on top of the San Andreas Fault, and you watch the water bubble out of that. And it doesn't matter where you grew up in the United States, the name San Andreas Fault. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid in Virginia, if there was an earthquake report, everybody would always talk about the San Andreas Fault. So it's iconic. It is the most dangerous thing we live around. Mm-hmm. But to be able to go and just stand there, and the palm trees grow naturally there because of the water supply coming up mm-hmm. from the mantle, from the separation of the plates. So those are probably some of my most favorite places.
If someone were thinking of moving here, what would you advise them?
In a heartbeat. We always have to walk a balance here because one of the great things about the Coachella Valley is it's a nice small. There's not a lot of traffic. And of course, we doubled in size during the season, and it'll take you half an hour to go from the freeway on Monterey to El Paseo. So I don't want to encourage everybody to live here, but I can't imagine living anywhere else because it is just such a special place. There is so much to do here. You have that small town feel, mm-hmm. and each of our small towns is. We're a cohesive valley. I love that we, have this kind of fabric of the Coachella Valley that's woven nicely together. But each town also has its own distinct personality. And mm-hmm. But if you want to see live theater, we have tremendous options for this. Some really fantastic theater, community theater going on. You see Broadway shows at the McCallum. Now we have this Acrisure Arena. Mm-hmm. Where if you want to see a more current act, and nostalgia acts like Madonna, and Shania Twain was just here. I mean, we're getting a Madonna World Tour. Who would have thought that?
That's true.
The casinos have always done a good job, and the show at Agua Caliente, they built that. It's a 2,500 seat place. It's a big showroom. Fantasy Springs is a big showroom. McCallum's only 1,200 seats, 1,200 seats. So you can only attract certain acts that way. Mm-hmm. But they've always done a great job of putting this incredible entertainment together. And now we have this 10,000, 11,000 seat arena. So we're getting these incredible acts that you used to have to go to LA to see or go to Vegas to see. And now we don't have to do that. We just have them right here in our backyard. So if someone were thinking about relocating, I would say, yeah, it gets hot in the summer, but you don't have to shovel the heat. I lived in Virginia. I had to drive through sleet and snow, and none of that's fun. Any place you live, anywhere, there are a couple of months where outside isn't really a great option. But I also play golf all summer long. I've had 2 rounds of golf rained out in 20 years that I lived here in California. So it's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise kids. You don't have some of the issues that you have in a San Francisco or a Los Angeles. But there's so much to do culturally. I think there's an awful lot to do. We've grown economically. It's not just a tourist town. There are other things going on here. We have great little startup technologies. I think CVAG has done a really good job of developing job opportunities for younger people. We have the Palm Desert campus of UC San Bernardino. We have a UC Riverside campus here as well. So there are great educational opportunities. It's just a great place to live. It encompasses all the things that you could want to do, but also in a place that's very comfortable to live.
Mm-hmm. What is your best life advice?
I have 2 pieces of advice. Marry the right person. And I was lucky to do that the second time around. Marry the right person. And for those of you who are going to work, if your company offers a 401k, max out your contribution. If I had done that when I started in television 30 some years ago, I wouldn't be working today. I always tell the kids who start with a TV station, like, I know it seems like a lot of money because you're not making much. I don't want to give up 8% of my salary, but do it.